So I'm streaming this to YouTube. If you connect to the Slack for the course, you'll find the link there. So there's going to be some coding in this lecture. It might help you to have that screen on your whatever you've got in front of you. So if you want to have a look. We've still got a few minutes till the start of the lecture, but I thought to let you know so you can sort that out. You can find the Slack is in the module. If you go on Blackboard, there is a link in the sidebar to the Slack channel. Okay, thank you. So I hope you're all getting used to the new campus. I think the new building is pretty cool, but we're still trying to figure out things like where the third year project lab's going to be, but I'm sure you'll get some information on that soon. Those of you who weren't here when I said it just a second ago, I'm going to start live streaming these lectures. I've put the link to this stream into the course's Slack channel. If you haven't joined that already, it's worth joining just to get some help from each other as you're working on your courseworks. These are archived, so you'll be able to see them after the fact, so you'll be able to watch them. The reason I use YouTube and not the lecture stuff here is because I don't think the lecture stuff, recording stuff we have here is as good. You can do things on YouTube like change the play speed. You can get automatic subtitles. I think it's a lot better for just generally everybody. That it's more accessible. We're going to start doing a lot more coding in lectures for the next. There'll be a little bit this week, but next week is going to be full-on coding. And so another reason I do streaming is because, like, you can see these projectors, but I think sometimes it's easier to have it in front of you on a laptop. So in a future lecture, you know this is happening, bring something with you, a tablet or whatever, you should be able to just watch it. These are unlisted videos, so I ask you not to share them with other people who aren't in the course. mainly so that you feel that you can still ask questions. This is like, this is not on my public YouTube channel. This is just one that I made pretty much for this course. So it's all there. It's just for you. I will post links to the archives as they appear. If I forget to, just poke me and I'll do it. So today, I'm going to continue doing the Slido stuff. So if you go to Slido and type in that number or make a note of it, in fact, I can write this down here. And this is just a way of asking questions. I'll look at them at the end. V708. That'll be the same code for tomorrow. So I'll look at it and I can try and respond to some questions between now and tomorrow. Last week, we looked at kind of the birth of websites, really. We started out looking at websites. And towards the end, we started thinking about forms and HTTP requests. So we talked about get parameters, post data that we can put in forms. This week, we're going to be full on looking at web applications. And this is the bulk of what this module is going to be for you, is how to make dynamic applications based on these requests that are being sent backwards and forwards. So that's HTML that will be generated on the fly by your application. And then starting next week, we'll be very specifically looking at ASP.NET. And that's when you'll have the information to really start getting your teeth into this stuff. So CGI we talked about, which was we can write some code in any old language, maybe even something as horrible as Fortran, have that sat on your server, a request comes in, I run a script, that makes some HTML, and I give that back to the user. And we saw a simple example of a C script that was a CGI, and it was awful. It was horrible code, and it was mainly to do with writing HTML, like taking in these numbers, parsing them, and then manually printing out some HTML, sending that back to the user. But that's not how we do it generally now. We have alternatives. There are some server-side and some client-side technologies. The client-side technologies, the code is actually sent to the user and processed locally. So there, the code is sent to you as the person behind the browser. You could look at that code if you want to. Okay, it's been sent to you and your browser is parsing it. So JavaScript is an example of that. Server-side code, like PHP, is code that you don't see as the user, but is on the server. So some logic, something is run on the server, and the result is sent to the user. So JavaScript, we will be doing some JavaScript in this course towards the end. It's the programming language of the web. A lot of people think of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as the three core technologies. Traditionally, JavaScript has been a client-side technology, something that's run locally on your browser. But it is also used server-side now with Node.js. Okay, Node.js is when something's being run actually on the server, and that can have some advantages because you can then have very similar code on your client as you do on the server because it's all the same JavaScript. Active server pages are a second generation technology from Microsoft. I don't know if you look for websites that end in .asp. They were built on this technology. We're going to talk about that technology in a bit more detail tomorrow. It was popular because it's easy when dealing with databases, which we'll find when we're doing this course. And it's from Microsoft, and so of course it's good. It's from Microsoft. But now it's kind of obsolete. So if you see that being used anyway, you know that they're a bit behind the times. ASP.NET, which is what we're going to be using, it's a successor to ASP and has a number of advantages. You'll often hear people just called .NET, and you'll be told, oh, you're a .NET developer. And they're talking about ASP.NET. It's heavily used by business, which is why I'm kind of pushing that as what we teach in this module. Because I think it's important that somewhere on your course you meet it. Even though I don't necessarily think it's the best technology for web, I think if you are much more employable if you have experience in this technology. ASP.NET Core is what we'll be working with, Core 2.0. Some of the materials in my modules are based on Core 1.0, but I expect you to use the latest. Okay, there are some minor changes, and I've updated some of the slides to kind of reflect that. .NET Core is open source and multi-platform. It's only been out a couple of years, so it is properly like the cutting edge in this area. PHP is kind of what we'll be talking about today. It's an open source alternative to ASP. So anything that has like a .php extension is using PHP. You'll often hear people talk about web development stacks. So you might hear people refer to themselves as a full stack developer. What they're talking about is they're talking about technologies they use for front end, for the database, the operating system of the server, and then the server technology itself. There are loads of different varieties, and people will argue for days on what are the best ones. There's LAMP, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, MAMP, WAMP, Wizard, which is Windows Server and the stuff that we'll be using, Mean, which is a more JavaScript-based stack, and Mern. So just be aware that these different stacks exist. And if you go for a job interview and they're like, what web development stack do you use? That's what they're talking about. They want to know what are all these things you use? What do you use client-side code? What do you use on the server? What do you use with the operating system? So PHP. It was created in 1994 by Rasmus Lerdoff, and it started out actually as a set of CGI scripts to track views of his personal homepage, which is where PHP came from. Over time, functionality was added, and it grew, and it was made public and open source. Remember what I said last time about the internet being kind of like the Talbot building, where bits and pieces have just been added over the years and kind of hacked together. This is like that kind of example again. But it's now one of the top 10 web development languages. So Laravel is a framework that's very similar to what we'll be doing in ASP.NET, but it's based on PHP. It's an interpreted language. It's not compiled on the server. A parsing engine parses the files and performs any of the tasks or the logic. It's not as sophisticated as ASP.NET, but it's much cheaper and easier to set up. Like I downloaded, because something was broken on my laptop, I could download something and get a server running on my laptop in 5 minutes. And it doesn't cost me a penny. Okay, it's not quite as easy with Microsoft, even though, you know, that's open source, it's getting better, but it's still, you know, if you say someone will set me up like a LAMP server, they'll do that without any issue. In fact, that's probably what you'll get. If you buy some hosting, you're going to have that. It's almost the default. It is getting better though. So with ASP.NET, you can actually use a bunch of different languages, and we'll explain that actually tomorrow. But you have a choice of languages, whereas PHP, you need to learn PHP. Okay, it's a scripting language, you need to learn that. So slight warning about this lecture. I'm going to be mixing HTML and PHP in the same files. This is bad practice. Very much the old way of doing things is putting everything together. What we should be doing is separating our logic from our views, from our HTML, for lots of good reasons that we're going to talk about later in this course. And kind of a key principle of this course is going to be separating our concerns about having files that do one thing and being able to get our designer to just look at the HTML and for it all to work. But this isn't how people used to do it, right? So like the history is, this is people just kind of tinkering and playing around, you know, for fun or whatever. They weren't thinking about the long term. They weren't thinking of Facebook ever being a thing, right? They weren't thinking of Amazon. They weren't thinking of Google. So these technologies were very much like just hacky. You know, I'm just going to print a line and color it red. Okay, it's not. They weren't thinking this far ahead, which is fine, and that's a good way of developing. But we now have to use more modern techniques, and you'll be expected to if you go into any company and start being a web developer. To do it properly, to do it the modern way, we would need a really deep understanding of PHP. That's when you'd start learning things like Laravel, which is a framework. But we don't need to do that for like our course here. I've included this lecture because PHP, what's good about PHP, you can see the nuts and bolts turning. You can see what's going on, and it should give you a good grounding in this concept. And that's kind of what I've been doing so far, is trying to give you like this background, this picture of roughly you get what's going on with websites and web applications, so that when we start working with ASP.NET, which is this bulky, horrible, massive, great framework, you still have that basic understanding in your head. So when things go a bit wrong, you've got that kind of grounding, that foundation. So that's why this PHP is here. I thought long and hard about it. I almost took it out this year, but I think there's some key concepts that get taught in this lecture that is important. Again, there's a video that goes along with this lecture on Blackboard where I do things like, I don't know, because of the day of the week, I would have done it slightly differently, and I'm not talking in front of people. So I do recommend just looking through that, watching that. I don't think it's very long. You might miss something that I miss in this lecture, or maybe other way around. So as I was saying, what's quite nice about PHP is it's pretty easy to just set up a local environment, start testing. You can't do what we did last week, where we just got a note. We opened up Notepad essentially and started typing in HTML and then double clicking on them, opening with a browser. That won't work with this because PHP is being run on a server. So we need the server running for it to work. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So what I've done is I've set up, I use WAMP server, but there are multi-platform versions of this. If you're interested, you can go there, download it, or you can just Google WAMP. You'll get a download from like ScourgeForge or something. Download it, install it, and then what you can do is you get like a directory, and you can just dump your source files in there, and it's like you've got a host on your computer. So if I try and show you what I've got set up, so in fact I'll just exit out that, it's easier. So for example here I've got in my www folder I've got a bunch of examples here. I've got my server is running. I can see because there's this little, it's green. So I've run the WAMP server. And then what that means is I can go to localhost and go to my folder, lecture 4 examples, and they're all here. So let's have a look. I'm going to go through this and we'll see what we've got here. Well, in fact, should I do this first? Okay. So let's have a look. So I'm going to open this up in Sublime because I like Sublime. Okay, so this is a very simple one. So it looks like HTML, but we've put some PHP there. So in these tags, you see the question mark PHP is where I put my PHP code or my PHP script. So what will happen is you'll send a request to this resource. Okay, in the browser, you'll go to this file essentially. So you'll give a URL with a path that points to that file, and the server will pass this file. It will know, because the extension is PHP, that it's expecting some PHP in there. So it starts, it comes down, oh, HTML, it's normal. And then it gets to this bit and it's like, oh, some PHP. And then what it does is it goes through line by line and then runs the PHP. That actually generates a HTML page, and then that HTML page is what's sent back to the user. So this one, it just says echo my first script. And if we go to script 1, then there we go. Okay, it just presents that. Now, if I go more tools, developer tools, and then click on source, and then double click here, what's like a key concept to understand is that in my source, I can't see any of the PHP. Okay, all I see is what the PHP output. So that means you can put like secret things in your PHP, things you don't want the user to see. Okay, maybe some hash keys or something like that. that can go in your PHP because that itself, that source code, isn't sent to your server. Now, if you are working with client-side scripting like JavaScript, your user would be able to see the code because the JavaScript is downloaded to their computer and run on the browser. So that's a key difference between client-side scripting and server-side scripting, is what we're showing the user. And in this case, because it's PHP, we're just seeing the source code. Okay. So, just to show you, let's get rid of that. So script 2. This one, I've just added the HTML stuff in there, and I'll show you, unsurprisingly, that works. Okay, so you can just put in normal HTML and it all works. So, some just very basic PHP now, just to kind of give you a quick introduction. So what we have, so this is the same line we had before. Echo just basically means print. We don't need to declare variables. We can just like start using them. So we can make variables with the $sign. So we've got here strings and numbers. We don't need to say what type they are, a bit like JavaScript. The $sign just helps the server pass things. So it's looking for $signs to see that there's supposed to be a variable there. And then we can actually print variables quite easily. So we can write our HTML here, and this will, we put the $sign in here, and it won't write $sign string when it outputs this. It knows there's a function $sign string, and it will write the actual string. We can also join things together with a dot here, and that will add strings together. So just to show you that working. So script 3. So this is that same script. So it's outputting the strings, it's outputting the variables. It's outputting the variables here, so you can see it in the HTML. Okay. And like I said, no PHP makes its way into your browser. So we can do stuff like, this is making a very simple calculator. So we first start, this is a PHP file. In fact, what I'll do is I'll show you it in here. So this is our file. So we can start out, action, script 4. So this hasn't got any of that. Hang on a second. Okay, there we go. So we looked at forms last time. So this is a simple, we started out with just a normal form. I put it in a section. So I said the method is get, which means we're going to do a get request with the results from this form, which means the parameters are going to go in the URL. The action is where we're going to send that form data to. So in this case, we're sending it to script5.php, which is this same one. These happen to be the default values. We didn't need to put them in, but we do for best practice. So we've put here in our form, we've got an input, v1, a select box that's action, an input, v2, and then a submit button. So I'm going to show you what this looks like in the HTML, in the actual page. So here, so we've got a box. So the idea is we put 0, 5, and then I click submit, and then I get the answer. So I'm just going to show you what the HTML looks like now. So at the moment, you can see I've only got the form there. So this is that. We're navigating to this file, and there's more stuff in here, but that isn't appearing yet. But if I put 0, let's say 1 plus 5, then click submit, and I get the answer. And I've also, there's a drop down menu here that's plus and minus, so I can change it to like 5, -5, and submit. And you can see we've got the variables are actually in the URL bar because we're doing a GET request. So let's see how this is actually working. So the PHP is doing this. So we've got if is set, and then what this is doing is it's saying we've got the $, which is saying it's a variable, and then we've got _get. Now this _get is a special variable that just is the get parameters that were in the URL. So we're first saying if submit is there, then we get the V1 and V2. Remember we've got V1 and V2 and we've got our action. So we're getting V1 equals get V1, V2 equals get V2. And then if the action equals plus, we add them together and print the result. Otherwise, we do the minus and print the result. This line here is kind of a key thing. And it's a key thing with web applications, is this idea that the web application doesn't have any idea about state. I want you to imagine you're the web server. You're sitting there just waiting for someone to send you a request. I turn up, it's the first time I've ever been to the site, I send a request, and you reply with this form. The next time I send a request, as far as the web server is concerned, it's the first time you've ever been there. Think about it like I'm sending a letter to someone, and then waiting for that letter to come back, and then sending another letter at some other time. There's no flow. So if you normally do you code something that's maybe a normal app, you know what order things are happening in, right? So the program is interacting with you directly. So you're like a calculator on your phone. You open the calculator up, it knows you've just opened the calculator app for the first time. Then when you do 1 + 1 and push equals, it knows what state it's in. It knows that you've just pushed the equals. The server doesn't have a clue. Every time it gets a request, it could be the first time you've ever been there, or it could be the 10th time you've been there. So what we have to do is we have to check to see, has this user submitted us a question? Has the user actually typed something into the calculator? And the way we do it is we see if this submit value is set. So if you look, I've got the input type submit, name equals submit, value is submit. So if you look here, the first time I go to this URL, there are no parameters, so that submit parameter isn't set. So the PHP knows this is the first time that they've been here. So I don't need to give an answer. And I'm going to make the calculator ready and new. If I then put some answers in, click submit, then you can see the submit value has been set in the get parameter, the parameter submit has been set. So the PHP knows, oh, submit is set. That means this is the second time they've been to us because they've actually put some data in that form and sent it. And without that, it's not going to know. And that's something you've got to get used to, is checking things. Your code doesn't know if this is the first time someone's come or the second time. So you need to write your code in a way that checks to see, right, is there any data coming with this? Because if there's data coming with this, I need to give a different type of response versus someone who's turning up for the first time and hasn't entered anything yet. That's a key concept to understand that will help you when you start coding a slightly more complicated thing. Yeah?
If there's no client-side scripting, how does your browser know to send another request when you've clicked submit?
Because it's sending the request, clicking submit sends the request.
And is that part of the HTML then?
That's part, yes, because it's a HTML form.
Yeah.
And when we do in the form, we set this action. This is telling the HTML what we want to happen when the form is clicked. And so in this case, we're saying when you submit this form, I want you to do a GET request to script5.php. And that's what that submit button does. What is interesting, which you actually bring to the second point, is if you notice, the whole page refreshes whenever I click submit. The whole page is reloading because I'm doing a new request each time. Now, you might not want that behavior, okay? What if you're typing in a comment on a Facebook post? You don't want the entire page to refresh when you click submit, do you? You want to just update that one area of the page. And that is done through a technology called Ajax, which is a more advanced technology where you can actually send requests within a page. So you can send a HTML request, a HTTP request, without refreshing the whole page. You can do it, you can stay on one page and you submit a HTTP request, you get some data back, and you then change a little part of the page. And so I think that's kind of what you're talking about. If you've got client-side scripting, like the real way of doing this now, the best way of doing this will be to write a calculator in JavaScript and do everything on the client side, right? That's what you would actually do if you were making a calculator. But obviously, imagine this is doing something more complicated, like looking at a server, doing some kind of database query. That kind of answer?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Let's go here. So that's important. Ajax. Right. Okay. So let's have a look at this one. Excuse me. So, okay, something simple again. This one is one of those stupid, like, things that you see sometimes that people tell you to go click on. Where are we? 6, let's say. Okay, let's just go to it. Let's navigate to it, see what happens. Okay. Okay, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So what it's done is it's taken a string that I've given it, it's added it to another string, and then printed it out. So it gets the name, it takes that string, and adds it to another string, and then prints that on the page. Okay, so we can see the name is there as a get parameter. Now, what if I do this? No, that picture's gone. Okay. Right, I need to find a picture. Okay, so if I put some HTML in there, what happens is that the HTML just gets put straight. So the HTML goes in there, and the HTML is interpreted by your browser. So I could put a form in there. Yeah? I could paste an entire form in that box, and a whole form would appear. I could paste a JavaScript script that takes control of your webcam, takes a picture, figures out where you are, where you live, and upload that to a server. I could put that in that box, and it would just work. And you click submit your name, thinking you're going to have a funny, oh yeah, this is my name as a Game of Thrones character, but actually you just took a picture of yourself and sent it to someone. Okay, that can happen. Now you might think, well, why on earth would I do that to myself? How is this why would I ever do that? But all the data is in the URL. So if I'm the idiot who made this website, someone else could come along and say, oh, I can use this. They could construct a URL, go to a URL shortener, make it 10 characters long, like tiny URL Game of Thrones name, send that to you in an email, you click on it, you don't know that hidden in that URL are all these parameters that take a picture of you. Yeah? And the person who was doing that didn't even have to make the website. They're so removed from this situation, they're just using your badly coded website as a vector. Now, this is cross-site scripting. An example of cross-site scripting where we were able to inject code into this page. Now, there are ways of getting around this. Let's get one that works. Oh, crap. There are ways of getting around this. So this one, if I do it the same, okay, I don't get anything. In fact, it doesn't even appear. Because what this one has got, script 7, this one, I've used this function strip tags. So what that does is that goes through the string and checks to see if there are any HTML tags and removes them. Okay, and that's called sanitizing your data. And that is crucial. Okay, it's really important. And it's something, I fell victim to this with my first web application, okay? It was some dumb game that I did, and there was a high score table. And I didn't really know much about web applications, I was just teaching myself. And I thought it'd be really fun if it was a JavaScript game, and that in the high score table, there was a picture of your world. So it was like a game where you create creatures and build islands and stuff. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you took a screenshot of your world and that was the leaderboard, was you see all these worlds. The way I did that is you can actually encode images into 64-bit strings. And then in JavaScript, you can decode those strings into a resource, into a picture. Of course, what I didn't realize is that there are a-holes on the internet and they made something else in that string. And I came along one day, and because that was being put into the leaderboard, and because of the way that I had implemented the leaderboard, when you went to the website, the leaderboard would load, but would be in a hidden frame. And then to see the leaderboard, you'd click like view leaderboard, it would make that frame appear. What they'd done is they put a load of code into the leaderboard that meant when anyone visited the page, the whole page was different, completely different. And just like I don't know what it was like some anonymous rubbish and, just saying, ha, I hacked your website. I was lucky that's what it was, okay? I was lucky that it was just someone kind of making fun of me. It could have been something very serious. And that was like a hard lesson to learn, but I wish I'd taken screenshots because now I teach web development and that would have been a great thing to show you. But it's important. Like, if someone did that to something stupid like that, imagine if you were doing something that mattered, right? You were working on something that was important. You would be surprised how much people don't do this. I have worked in big organizations. I was working with someone who was developing a web-based, they were developing like a database-based system. And so they were doing a lot of copy and pasting of SQL statements. And then they wanted to look up one of their students on a student intranet. They just kind of like they double-clicked on the student number, pushed Control-C, but actually didn't push Control-C, then pasted in the box, clicked Go, and got a bunch of SQL errors because they'd accidentally pasted in an SQL statement. And that's when they realized that they could have just typed in drop table students into that, clicked submit, and all the student data at the university would have been gone. And this person very quickly emailed like Central IT and said, hey guys, this is not good. But it happens, right? And like your job is to not let that happen. And security is something I take like, obviously like we're talking about semi-funny, this is kind of funny what's happened here. But this can have very serious consequences. Like the webcam example is not even a lie. Like that can happen, right? Modern features in browsers means you can take control of someone's webcam. You can take control of someone's hard drive and you can find their location. Okay, it's serious stuff. And I expect everyone in here, I feel like I have an ethical duty to make sure you all leave this course knowing how important that is. And there's a key part of, in the mark scheme, there is a whole section on security. And the second examiner, I guess, for this module is Neil Harmon. And we've had a long discussion about this, and we kind of decided that any kind of basic security flaw in a web application, and we give 0 in that section. And it sounds really harsh, but it is very important because your data is important. And if you're being a web developer, you are responsible for people's data. And that is incredibly serious. And there is too many cases that you see happening in the real world where data is lost or data is, is got out. And that's serious stuff. But the good news is the frameworks we use, Microsoft understand it's important. So you literally have to break the framework to make mistakes. Unfortunately, about 10% of students have done that previously, have decided that they're going to implement their own password system and not use the one that Microsoft provide to you that has like years and years of development and research behind it. So do that. That's like, it's one of those things that the less you try and mess around with stuff, the more you let the framework do the work for you, the better. It's like having a good kitchen knife. Like if you have a good knife, the knife does the work for you. It's the same with the framework. Okay, the framework is a good framework. Let it do the work for you. It's just about understanding how that happens. So that's what the picture was going to be, which would have made much more sense than the cat. GPS slideshow. It's been up there for like 2 years. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I want to show another example, one example now, of where I've used PHP. So that was game number 1. I screwed up. So game number 2, these hackers aren't going to get me. So I made a game that released on itch, and it's now on Steam. But I used to use my own web server for it before I was using like the Steam leaderboards. So a leaderboard, you want a leaderboard for your game. You want people to get a high score, that to be uploaded to your database, and you only want the people with high scores to be at the top. You don't want to let people submit their own score, okay, to type in their own stuff. Because remember, so I set up a PHP script that was on my web server that then Unity in the C#, there's actually a function in Unity that creates a HTTP request and sends that to your server. Now, you don't need to do it from Unity. Anyone could just browse to that file if they found it, and it wouldn't be too hard to find because if you know what you're doing, you can play the game, you can watch the network traffic that's going on, you can see, so there was a request made to this website. So then you just go to that website, you can write your own HTML form and just set the action to whatever my file was and just put in whatever data you want and click go. And then you're top of the leaderboard. Congratulations. So you want to stop that happening. And this is the kind of solution that a lot of people use. But I wanted to show you this because it's an example. It's a real world example of actually like something that I used in real life. And it's starting to teach these little concepts of web apps. So in the game, you build a URL and you add the get parameters. So you build a string, you have the score, you have some other things, and you send that. And we want to stop users uploading anything. It's not perfect, this implementation, but it's good enough. And like the thing to remember with a lot of security, you can make things more difficult. You're not going to get anything perfect, right? But you can keep making things more difficult. And there's like this difficulty like thing here. And then there's the reward for the person doing something. If the reward for someone is stealing all your money, then that's a pretty good reward. So you need to make it quite difficult because they're going to keep trying a bit harder. If the reward is I get first place in a game that not that many people play, right? That the reward is down here. So you just got to make it kind of difficult, and they're not going to bother. And so that's what this is. So this is the PHP script, and I wanted to kind of bring you through. Hopefully this is helpful. So first, this PHP script is sitting on my server. So the PHP, remember, the user can't see. The PHP code is run on the server. So what I do is I have this ini file, that has some information to do with my database in. So username, password. This isn't my actual database username and password. The database name, and then a key. And that key is like really hard to guess. Okay, and I would generate it with a password manager or something. Okay. And then you can connect to a database using this line. Don't worry too much about the details. And then we've got, remember this underscore get? So a URL, so this is all through get parameters. So I'm getting the name, the score, the GUID, which is a global unique identifier. What you tend to do, I don't know if you've heard of these, but what I didn't want is I didn't want to have to worry about people signing up for an account. So it turns out, using probability, there are these things called global unique identifiers that there's so many possibilities, you can guarantee that we won't have the same one. Okay, it's basically like a random number generator that is unrepeating. Okay, so that's what a global, so you can generate a GUID pretty easily. I'm escaping MySQL statements, okay, which is similar to removing HTML tags. So I'm making sure they're not like drop table in there or anything. And then I've got this thing called a hash, and this is kind of where a lot of the implementation is going to come from. So you guys can read that sometime. So now this is where it gets kind of interesting. So if I left it, like if I didn't have this hash, like this is the naive implementation, is just do this stuff. And then anyone could just browse to that web page and enter their own score with their own unique ID and their own name. Okay, but I want to stop that. And the way you do it is using a hash function. So what I do is I add together I've got two strings, the score, the username, and then that secret key that's stored on my server and is in my source file, which in theory you could probably get out the source file with some like reverse compiling, but that's quite difficult. They're probably not going to bother. So assume that that's kind of secret. I add those strings all together and then I perform a hash on it. Now, what I've done in the source code in the game, it does the same thing. The game source code has that secret key in. It adds those strings together. It does the same hash, and I'll explain what a hash is in a moment if you don't know what it is. It's a function that takes a string and makes another string. And you can only go one way. You can't get back from your hash to your string, or at least it's extremely hard to. Yeah, it's very hard to do that. It then checks, is the hash that I've generated here on the server the same as the hash that was generated in the source code in the game? If they're the same, then I know that this is legit. Otherwise, it's not, because I know the person, like the user, doesn't have that secret key, doesn't know the order that I've added these strings together, or that I've even done a hash at all, so I can tell if it's a legit request or not. And that's kind of that's the way it works. And a lot of security is around these hash functions, which are one-way functions that you get an input, you have some hash function, or you get an output. And they're very cleverly designed that if there's a small change in your input, it actually results in a massive change in the output. And there's no way of getting back to here without just kind of doing brute force stuff. When we go to our security lecture, we'll talk a bit more about how these can be broken and how you can make them even better. But that's the idea, and that's kind of this way of thinking. And you have to keep thinking this when you're doing anything where you don't want the user to be able to change things. Is A, users don't need to use your interface to upload data, number one. They don't need to use your forms. They can make their own forms and upload them. Number two, any client-side scripting, they can't see it. They can see so server-side scripts they can't see, they can see client-side scripts. And in this case, I use the fact that most people aren't going to be able to find the source code to get that hash from there, to see that that's what's going on. They're not going to bother, okay, because there's no point. And there's the full code. The rest of the code is just formatting it, returning some strings, and then in Unity, you take that and you format it into a table. And also, like, this is a web application that I didn't use a browser. Like, it was a program that was sending requests. So if you're interested in PHP, here are some resources. But I will just check to see if there are any questions after I stop this streaming.